Okay, so welcome again to this wonderful Kehila Ner Avram. In Avodas HaParsha, part of our job is to try to see, the Torah sometimes gives us a lot of information. But Torah we know is Torah's Chaim, the Lashon of Hara. It's teaching us something. So I'm always on the lookout for Swerim that can open that up, that can take the things that are information and see how that information is guiding us. So tonight we're going to have to go through some of the information first before we get to that guidance which is there, because that's what opens it up for us. So the piece we're going to be learning tonight mostly is a piece from the Sefer Rav Moshe Wolfson shlita called the Tefa. He has been for many, many years, was the Mashgiach of Avodas in New York, and he founded the Kehila called the Yisrael that has branches all over. And he's one of the great teachers of Hasidus to many people. There, everyone from Hasidic Rebbes to the Rebbeim in YU come to him and learn and get Eitzah from him. So he has a piece here which he calls Moriah Machpelah, the two places that we find in Tanach that we bought with hard, cold cash. Okay, Moriah Machpelah. Avraham Avinu got the Sdei Machpelah, 400 shekel kesef, and the place of the Beis HaMikdash that David purchased from Arabna Yevusi. Those are those two places. Now we might think, okay, it happened to explain each one, but Rav Moshe, I guess, must say the Litim in Shul that most of us skip now. So he points out that in the Hayat, what they call in the Piyutim said on Parshas Shkolit, this is the line. It says, Zachar Dodi Zacharli Shikle Ephron. Right? Dodi, like my beloved one. Remember for me the Shkolim of Ephron, Asher Shokal Av B'Machpel Chevron. That the father, like, weighed out in the Machpel Chevron, in buying the Marzah Machpel in Chevron. Then it goes on, Chaker Shikle Yevusi. Right? Examine the Shkolim of the Yevusi. Right? Mashbise Charon Zacharli Ad Ladar Charon. And these two sets of Shkolim, the purchase of Marzah Machpel, the purchase of the Beis HaMikdash, will be Mashbise Charon. They're like a schus that stop anger. And he says, remember these for me, Ad Dor Acharon. So somehow the purchase of those two people, this is in the Payat, in the Piyutim for Parshas Shkolim.
Oh.
You know, that's so, and some of those were written by Rishonim, according to many people. Belazar Kalir was a Rishon. So there are these Piyutim. So these Piyutim, they're in the back of the Siddur usually.
The Sfarad Siddur?
Yeah, even Ashkenaz, yeah, right? This.
I was a little boy, and we used to say, oh, this way.
Yeah. No, they put it in the back, like in some congregations, you know, they say. It's hard enough to get people.
Difficult with Roshan, although.
Yeah.
Well,
right, he probably was able to see what everything was referencing. So he says like this. He's going to start with some questions that'll help open up the nature of Marzah Machpelah and Chevron and the nature of Har Bayis and the Beis HaMikdash, the similarities and differences. Okay, so first of all, right, as we saw, there's something important about the fact that those two places, Har Bayis, the Mokom HaMikdash, and Marzah Machpelah, were purchased. Now, the location of Marzah Machpelah is in Kiryas Arba hi Chevron, the town of Kiryat Arba, which is Chevron. Now, Rashi brings down two explanations from why it's called Kiryat Arba. The first one is Al Shem Arba Anokim Shehoyu Sham, named after the four giants who lived there, Achiman, Sheshai, Talmei, Va'avihem. And these were very negative personalities that you see in the Midrashim. And in fact, their descendants were what the Meraglim saw when they came and they said, V'gam b'nei ha'anak ra'inu sham. We saw the children of the Anak, and this was what frightened them. The second parish in Rashi is because of the Arba Zugos, because of the four couples who were buried there. Adam and Chava, Avraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, and Yaakov and Leah. Esau's head we'll leave for later. That's a separate. Correct. Excellent. Very good. Right? He's so I thought of that. I was thinking, I don't know if this is for sure true. In other words, it could be a two-part process, meaning that the nation who was there before called it Kiryat Arba, Al Shem, the four giants that lived there, so to speak. Right? But that happened through Ashgocha right, that it should be called Kiryat Arba because of the four Zugos that would be there. That may be one approach which is there. But sometimes things are called Al Shem Al Osid, but that may be why and how it happened. So his question is, why would a place of such Kedusha have this association with people that were negative? And in fact, Rashi brings that first, even before the Perush about the Odes. Again, we're only going to do like a certain movement of the symphony. It's a very large piece, right? And part of it has to do also with the world of Kiddushin and the fact that we learn out the whole fact that Kiddushin is done with money from the purchase of Maras HaMachpelah, which seems like kind of, seems like kind of a grim source for this very Areat Mekudeshesli, like Avram Avinu buying a grave for his wife Sarah. Yeah, thank you. You know, it seems strange. He gets into that. He also gets into the fact and the difference of Kever Rachel and the fact that Leah is buried in Maras HaMachpelah, not Rachel. Those each have two different functions. We're not able to go there tonight with our time. Another question. Hebron is mentioned when Yosef is going to his brothers. And it says, Vayishlacheu me'emek Hebron. The Yaakov sent Yosef me'emek Hebron. Rashi says that emek Hebron was me'etza amukla shel oso tzadik ha'kover b'Hebron. From the deep etza of the tzaddik who was buried in Hebron. Now, what he goes on to say is that because Am Yisrael had to go into Golus, Avram Avinu was told, Geri Yezaracha, your children will be strangers. So that had to happen, and now it was happening. That was why Yosef went to the brothers, and the brothers would sell him, and he would get to Egypt, and Am Yisrael would get to Egypt. He says, what does that have to do with Avram Avinu being buried in Hebron? HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avram Avinu they're going to go to the Mitzrayim in what we call the Bris Ben Absarim, right? That he says, there are Svarim that say that took place in Hebron. He quotes a sefer that says that. Or you should have said from the Eitzah Mukah of the Gzeira that was Nigzar in Hebron. What does that have to do with Avram Avinu being buried in Hebron? Another question, just before we go. In the Svarim, it says that they spoke very much about the great milas of Maras HaMachpelah. Okay, this gets more into the mystical Svarim. He's quoting it here from the Yalkut Ruveni, who's quoting it from the Megala Amukos, one of the great Mekubalim 100 years ago, that the Maras HaMachpelah is the opening to Gan Eden, and that the Neshamos all go up through there. Okay, and he says that the Avos still daven for Am Yisrael there, brought in the Gemara and Bab Metzia. And the Tfilos, it says, goes through Maras HaMachpelah. Now that's problematic because Rashi says specifically, right, when Yaakov Avinu, right, sleeps in the Makom HaMikdash and gets up, and he says, Zeh Shara Shamayim. Rashi says this is the place where the Tfilos go. This is the gateway for the Tfilos. They go through Yerushalayim. And we turn to Yerushalayim when we daven, we don't turn to Hebron. So, which is it? What is it? How is it? Okay, so he explains like this. Hebron and Yerushalayim are really two sides of one coin. They're really one item, but in certain ways they're opposites. Let's explain. Yerushalayim in the Beis HaMikdash was a place of Gilul, a place of Hashem revealing Himself, a place where, so to speak, we could see HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shechina. Bahar Hashem Yeira'eh, right? That Hashem will be seen there. The Beis HaMikdash was there for people to go to. There were Nisim. In the first Beis HaMikdash, there were 10 constant Nisim that happened every day. And the Kedusha of the place came from the Avos. Each of the Avos davened in that place. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Yaakov calls it Mokom Shispalalu Bo Avosai. It was a place on a mountain. It was a place which was revealed. It was Kibesi based Tefillah Yikari El Chola Amim. It was the center of the world. It was the sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shechina is among Am Yisrael. And a person who went up to the Beis HaMikdash was transformed. The Sefer HaChinuch explains that's why we have so many mitzvahs that would make a person have to go to Yerushalayim, right? It's hard for us to get into the reality of what's there. If you lived in Tzvat or something, so at different times you would have to bring up your Meiser Sheni to Yerushalayim, your Orla to Yerushalayim, your Bikurim to Yerushalayim, right? Aside from Korbanos that you had to bring, people would go to Yerushalayim often. And he says that was because entering the Beis HaMikdash and the closeness to the Shekhinah that you would feel there and seeing the Avodah would make you a different person, and you would bring that home to wherever you came from. So that's the common denominator of what we find in the Beis HaMikdash. It's revealed, it's a revelation, it's a way that you can connect and see and feel closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, the Maras HaMachpelah is the exact opposite. The Maras HaMachpelah is underground, right? A cave is something which is under. And the Avos who are there are not there in a state of what we call Chaim, physical Chaim. They're buried there because their time came, right? And it's a place where you don't even see the kever, meaning aside from the big building built on it, etc. Even if you go down, like he says, Maras HaMachpelah, Chazal said it was a machlokes. It was Ma'ara Lifnimi Ma'ara, right? If it was one cave inside another cave, meaning it wasn't even the outer cave, it was the inner one, or one was up, one was down. But no matter what, even if you were standing in the entrance, he says, you wouldn't be able to be there. And he says, in reality, he says, it's not meant to be a place. It's meant to be a no place. Let's try to explain this. It has a location. They were supposed to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. It's supposed to be there. But unlike the Beis HaMikdash, which is something we can interact with in the world of place, the kever of the Avos is not something we can interact with in terms of place. It's hidden. Now let's think. He says all of Am Yisrael were hidden in the Avos. When Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were walking around the world, I was inside of them. Why is that? Because I'm their descendant, right? If I have an apple on the table and there's a seed in the apple, so whatever trees come out of that apple were really inside that seed, which was inside that apple at the time. So the Avos were carrying us. But now, at this point in history, we're carrying the Avos in us, meaning that what they implanted inside of us is part of us. And it parallels the way they exist in the world now. Meaning, the Avos are buried deep, deep, deep in the world, in a place which we're not even aware of and can't access. The Avos inside each of us, inside of our small world, are buried deep, deep, deep inside of us. They're in a place, there's a Ma'aras HaMachpelah, he says, inside of each of us, inside of our heart. And there he says, that point which is called the Avos is Nignezesu Tmuna. It's buried and hidden in there. And even if a person doesn't feel it, because it's double buried, it's kaful, it's hidden and hidden and hidden upon hiddenness, it's there. And when you daven, the Avos are davening with you because they're within you. So that's why we start the Shemona Esrei with the bracha of Avos, because you first get together, so to speak, with your Avos, Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, and they daven with you because they are part of you. Okay, but there's nothing physical about that. That's something entirely ruchni, entirely spiritual, which is hiding inside of you there, and that's the aspect of the Maras HaMachpelah. Now let's look at what happens in time of Churban. Time of Churban, Utnei Avonosenu Galinu Me'atzenu, Ischachaknu Ad Vasenu, Enach Yocholim Lalos Eros, Beveis B'chirasecha, B'bayis Hagodav HaKodesh. We can't go, we can't interact. The Beis HaMikdash is gone. The Ashras HaShechina that we could experience there in that way is not there. All of those things were gone. The Maras HaMachpelah was never destroyed. In reality, says the Maras HaMachpelah can't be destroyed. Because, like the Nebuchadnezzar Chaim explains, with Titus, the Baskol that Titus heard when he was arrogant about destroying the Beis HaMikdash, he says, you're arrogant about that? You ground flour that was already ground. Ba'isor sarafta. You burnt a house that was already burnt. Meaning that when Am Yisrael were no longer worthy of the Beis HaMikdash, so that Hasharas HaShlita left us and Titus burnt the shell. But with Moriah Samachpela, there's no shell. There's nothing that can be touched by anybody else. It remains, right? He says, therefore, it's an aspect of Golus, that it's buried and it's hidden, but it's the presence of Hashem that's with us in Golus always, right? We know that Golu, above El Shechina Imam, wherever Am Yisrael went into Golus, the Shechina was with them, and the seat of that Shechina, so to speak, is that Moriah Samachpela inside of us. It's that Nakuda of the Avodas which is inside of us. Hebron, he says, has the same letters as Chorban. Okay? Meaning, those two aspects are connected. Hebron and Yerushalayim. When Yerushalayim is destroyed, our kesher goes through Hebron. It goes through that which is hidden, which is buried inside of us, and can never be affected. So that is when Hashem says, Anochi haster aster ponani, that double loshem, I will hide my face. He says that's the bechina of Moriah Samachpela. But in that place where Hashem is hiding, and obviously when someone hides, it doesn't mean they're not there. They're there. The place, so to speak, where he hides is the place of the Avodas, is the place of that Moriah Samachpela. So, therefore, he says, really, Hebron and Yerushalayim are somewhat linked. And Hebron shows, in fact, the idea that Yerushalayim is never totally destroyed, it is going to be rebuilt. Because it maintains that connection that comes from the Avodas, and it's a spark that cannot be out. It's nothing that can be taken apart. It's the chibur that's always there. It's the connection that's always there. Now, he says the idea that there were these Kiryat Arba called after these four giants who were very negative people, he says it simply adds to the praise of Hebron. The idea that the Kedusha is there and it's untouched in the middle of the worst tumah. This is a sign to Am Yisrael, even though these four klipos, he said, which represent the four Golios, the four exiles that Am Yisrael are going to go through, they're sitting smack on top of the Moriah Samachpela. They can't touch it. They can't do anything to it. That's untouchable. That's immutable. Okay? So that is something that we always have. So he says, we turn to Yerushalayim because Yerushalayim is the point of tefillah. We don't turn to Hebron because Hebron isn't really a place. Hebron is ruchniistic truth. Okay? And that's something that's always inside of us. But that we point to. Listen to how he concludes this. Again, there are many more parts to this, but how he concludes this in terms of our avoda and what this means. Okay, so we got a lot of information here. It's very nice, you know, Yerushalayim is this aspect, Hebron's that aspect. Yerushalayim can be destroyed, Hebron can't. Yerushalayim is accessible, is visible. Hebron is hidden, buried. It's buried inside of each of us. And then comes, so what? So here's how he applies it. He says, Ata achi akore. Says, my brother is reading this, he says, you know that you have two holy places inside of you, Yerushalayim and Hebron. We all have inside of us a Yerushalayim and a Hebron. And sometimes we have a Yerushalayim, period. At a time when you feel clarity, when you feel light, you feel close to Hashem, you feel how good it is to be a Jew, to have Torah. He says, you're going on your Har HaMoriah. He says, you are going into your Beis HaMikdash, right? And that is a place which was built by the Avodas, which are there. And you can see the beauty of it. But he says there are other times in your life. Asher halev nistam. Your heart is blocked. Hamach sagurum sugar. Your mind is totally closed. Hashamayim shulcha mitkadrim barpulei ofel. Your skies are clouded with very dark clouds. Hachoshech techase einecha. Your eyes are covered with darkness. Ein lecha chesed l'Torah. You have no desire for Torah. Shari tefillah stumim v'atumim. Your gates of tefillah are totally blocked. You can say the words, but you don't feel anything. It's not there. Ein lecha chesed l'Torah. You have no desire to learn. He says, what do you do then? Where do you go? He says, that's the time of the Korban of your Beis HaMikdash. That's when you go to Hebron. says, Tevakesh es shava nafshecha. You're looking for that which you want. You're not able to find it. He says, you know what happened in this time of Churban? He says, you can't go up to your Beis HaMikdash. You can't go up to your Har Moriah. He says, go down your Ma'ar Samachpela. Like Kali bin Yefune, who ran to the Ma'ar Samachpela to daven, right, that he shouldn't be caught up in the eights of the Meraglim because he didn't know which way he was going to go. He was torn. He says, daven with Amunah, that it's important in doing something even though you don't feel any chiyus in your davening. Learn Torah, even if it's bitter to you. He says, like bitter wormwood instead of cholav udvash. Work and do your avodas Hashem like an ox with the yoke. He says, because your machpelah is never going to be destroyed. That's always there. It's very, very hidden, but you know that it's there. He says, you have to, there's a pasuk in Yeshaya, V'chisila Hashem amastir ponav mibeis Yaakov v'kivisilo. I wait for Hashem, who's hidden his face from Beis Yaakov, and I hope for him. So he says, that is when you strengthen your emunah, right? And times will come. A time of binyan will come. Hashem will have rachamim. And your Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt. But to know that Hebron is always there, that's always it. Brings an interesting remez that Ephron relates to the word ofar, which is dirt. He says, as far as bring the avodah of the Beis HaMikdash was based on fire, eish. Right? And it talks about Hashem will rebuild the Beis HaMikdash with eish. But eish, unless it's some supernatural eish, goes out. Ofar, earth, nothing happens to it. There's a famous fable out in the world about a king who asked his children to bring him a birthday present. So one brought him this beautiful crown of gold. Another one brought him this fabulous diamond. And another one takes out this bag, and the king's wondering what's in it, and looks in, it's a bag of dirt. So he tells that son, you're going to have to be executed. He says, before you execute me, can I have a minute or a little demonstration? He says, yes. So he takes the crown, and there's a big fireplace roaring. He puts the crown there, and the gold melts. He takes the diamond, right, and he brings whatever tools diamond cutters use, gives it a big whack, and the diamond cuts in hand. He says, let me now demonstrate. I take the dirt, I put it on the fire goes out. I take a hammer and I pound on the dirt, nothing happens to it. He says, the gift I gave you, Father, is much better. His father might have executed him for melting the crown, breaking the diamond, but that's a separate story. But this is the idea of the Yesod HaOfar can't be destroyed. That's the aspect of Ephraim. Okay, now I wanted to bring it. Correct. The Sod from the Alpha, right? There in the beginning, it's there in the end. The chibur of guf and nefesh split, right? But el offer tashuv, you were offer, you turn to offer. That's why we bury that way. Now, there's a story which I think I have time for that illustrates this idea very much of this aspect inside. And he mentioned in there that the Avos, meaning Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? That aspect is something which is untouchable. And this, in fact, was what Yaakov Avinu davened for when it says that in Bnei Korach, when they wrote about Korach and his lineage, it stopped at Levi. It didn't go up to Yaakov, because Yaakov Avinu had said, "Besodom al techad kavodi," right? That this shouldn't impact me. Now the question is, right? So he said, this is the idea, because Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are the Moriah Machpelah. No matter what Am Yisrael do, nationally or individually, no matter how they sin, nothing touches or messes with that Moriah Machpelah port. So here, this is a biography of the Sridei Eish, Rechil Yaakov Weinberg, who was a Talmud of Slobodka, then went to Germany, where he is in charge of the Hildesheimer Seminary. He managed to escape after being imprisoned somewhat out to Switzerland, and the famous Posek Lamden. So it brings a story that he told of something that happened. He said after the First World War, so he was davening on Yom Kippur in one of the big shuls in Berlin. Now it came time for Yizkor. Okay, suddenly a government minister pulled up in a limousine on Yom Kippur. His name was Walter Rittenau, and he was Jewish, and he was, afterwards, he was even the minister, the foreign minister, And he said his father, Emil Rittenhauer, was a very big industrialist. And, he founded AEG, his famous company, AEG. Okay, now he says the father had already entirely assimilated. The son continued. But on that Yom Kippur, he wanted to come for Yizkor. So he came with a motorcade. He came with this limo. They had whatever, police, etc. And he stayed there for Yizkor. And then he went back out to his car. So he said there were some Jews there from the east. At this point, after World War I, there was a lot of migration. So many people were homeless then. Many Jews from the east ran away to Germany. The Germans would call them the Ostjuden, the Eastern Jews. And they thought that this was ridiculous. They said, this is covered for your father? You come, you Mechala Yom Kippur v'Farhesia. You basically drive your limo up the stairs of the shul, right? And Rav Weinberg thought about this. He told them, he said it very strongly. He says, he shouldn't make fun of this. He shouldn't treat this lightly. He said, this respect that he has for his parents is something very, very deep inside of him. It's a deep Jewish feeling. It's his connection to that chain. And he says, if that's still there, something can happen. Okay? And he said that this was what Yaakov Avinu said when he passed by Har HaBayis, right? He said, Man nora makom hazeh, ein zeh ki im beis Elokim v'zeh shar hashamayim. The Gemara says that he missed it, he walked by it, and then suddenly he said, Efsho avarti u'mokum sh'yispalu avoisai, v'ani lo yispalalti. Could it be that I passed by the place where my forefathers davened, and I didn't daven? He says, why didn't he say this is the place which is the center of the world, from which the world was founded? Why didn't he say this is the place where the Beis HaMikdash is going to be built? Right? That alone should be enough that you should stop there. But he said he felt that was the place that his father and his grandfather davened. And he felt such a place I have to connect to. That's my Shar HaShamayim. Where my forefathers davened, if I can connect to that, that's my Shar HaShamayim. Okay, so what happened from there? This book was written by a Talmud of his, right, named Avram Abba Weingart. So he says a few years ago, before he wrote this, he was giving a shir in this town of Modi'in to a group of young people in someone's house. And he happened to mention this story, right, about this Rittenhouse. And somebody in the room got up and he said, you're speaking about Rittenhouse? He says, I am his, I think it was great-grandson, right? He says, what happened? He said, and he came to hear this. So what happened was that Emil Rittenhouse had a son. And in other words, the one who came to say Yizkor, he had a son, Walter. And Walter didn't get married. And he had, but there was a daughter, who did have a son. Now that son, in other words, the grandson of the fellow who came to say Yizkor, he once walked by a shul in Hamburg, and he heard the nigunim of the shul, and he was like captivated by it. And he decided that he was going to move to Eretz Yisrael, and he was chozer b'tshuva. And his son went in his ways, and this fellow on the shir was his grandson. So he says, there I was able to see what my Rebbe said. Don't make fun of it. Something's alive there. And then he brings an interesting, another episode. Oh, it's almost time for my... The author of this biography, said he was in Boston one year. He went to hear the Shiurim of Soloveitchik in Boston. And while he was there, he said he'd heard about the Bostoner Rebbe and the work that he was doing with college students. And he was very interested, right, in terms of what his approach was, how he was successful. So he explained with this idea that Yaakov Avinu davened that his name wouldn't be connected to the machlokas of Korach, right? But he says every kid in school knows that Korach came from Levi, came from Yaakov. What does it help? So he says Yaakov Avinu saw that there will be more Korachs in the future. Throughout Jewish history, there will be people who rebel. There are people who are there. People who make machlokas. He says, let it not be that the machlokas can affect this point of Yisrael. That point always remains, no matter what's done, what's ever there, and that Yisrael is Yisrael, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that place of the Avos, that Moras HaMachpelah. So the Rebbe said, that is my job, somehow to believe that inside every Jew that place is there, and somehow to expose them to their heritage and to hope that that opens up. So that's something that we have to know inside of us, something we have to know it's there inside of everybody. That's that strange cave that none of us have ever seen and probably none of us ever will. I don't even know if anyone's able to see it, but it's there. And unlike that Beis HaMikdash, it's always there and it's always been there. It's always been inside of us and it's always gone with us. And it's there inside of everybody. And from there is the chibur, is the unbroken connection that will eventually lead to the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash and Moriah.